Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. Today is Friday, August the 6th, 2021. What I'm going to do today is just going to run through a few of the stories from the past week that have grabbed my attention from the New York Times since last Sunday. Let me just start with last Sunday, one of the articles that really jumped out at me, and you can't make this up. Blaming Pelosi for violence, the GOP, there it is, blaming Pelosi for the violence. The GOP is striving to turn the riot upside down. So this week, while we had 4 members of the Capitol Police Force appear before Congress and attest to the violence that took place in Washington on January 6th, the conservative right-wing GOPers are outside attempting to blame Pelosi for the riot, while making the riot out to be normal day of visitors cruising around the White House. What a bunch of... Talk about 1984, I'll tell you. A couple of days later, this would be the next day, Monday's paper. The headline that grabbed me over here was the Myanmar junta. So Myanmar, these guys say that they're going to stay in control until 2023 when they're going to allow an election to take place. Well, nobody in the country believes that they're going to allow an election to take place. The junta in Myanmar has taken over the hospitals. The COVID situation and the virus outbreak is just all over the country. The generals don't know what they're doing in these hospitals, and the people who are running the hospitals have left the hospital because the generals are so authoritarian. They're taking the whole place over. So right and left people are just sort of leaving them there, and the infrastructure of the whole country is falling apart. As the generals are taking over, everybody else is leaving and getting out of their jobs, and the whole place is falling apart. Aung San Suu is, I believe, behind bars now. I know they've arrested her. And originally, for about 3 years there, she was on an island under a house arrest. I don't think she's under a house arrest right now. I think she's under arrest. This is Thursday's paper. Activist attacked, now faces charges himself. Check this guy out over here. Whoops. Yeah, over. Where is he? Over here. This guy over here. Activist. So this is last summer, a video of a white guy attempting to pin a black guy onto a tree near a lake in Indiana. It says last July 4th. This white guy is attempting to pin this black guy against the tree. Somebody shows up with, get a noose, and you're threatening to hang this guy. There's nothing more American than charging a black man in his own attempted lynching. So they first charged these people with attempting to lynch this guy in a public park. He wouldn't cooperate with the prosecutors, and he wanted to go to trial. He didn't want a mediation. He knew he was going to not do well in a mediation. He could see that coming. So he wanted to get a trial. He didn't want to mediate. As a result of that, they turned the tables on him, and they charged him with trespassing on public property. He's at a public park. He gets threatened with a noose, and now they're charging him with a trespassing on public property. As the quote goes, there's nothing more American than charging a black man in America for his own attempted lynching. Myanmar, Pelosi. Unbelievable. On the Thursday paper, the 5th, also, Mexicans sue gun companies saying they fuel the carnage. That's below the fold there, that article down here. That's the one. The day before in the paper, there was a whole city in Mexico with it was in central Mexico, not that far from Mexico City, where something like 80% of the people are afraid to go out because there's so much violence in the streets. People, you don't send a kid out. You don't just run down the store and get a quart of milk anymore. You got to make sure you have a bodyguard to make it to the grocery store. There's so many guns in some of these cities. Well, for decades, the government and its citizens have been victimized by a deadly flow of military-style lethal guns from the United States into Mexico. Not only are the guns flowing, they're also targeting them and advertising them for Mexicans. So they've got the Emiliano Zapata gun. They're putting little sayings on the gun. They're putting little Mexican trinkets on their guns and embroidering them into the handle. They're doing everything they can to push the gun sales in Mexico. Finally, the country is going to take on Colt Industries in the courts. That ought to be an interesting story to watch. Moving to economics for a quick one. Top headline there: Feds see rate rise in 2013 if the economy stays on pace. So I've talked about this in the past, how the Fed is basically pumping out money at almost no interest rate that the corporations are gathering up, buying back their own stock, not opening new plants, not creating new products, not creating anything new, buying their own stock, increasing their own value. While their stocks go up, the American pantry stock, the people, what you're feeding people on your table, is going down. So the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the Fed doesn't want to raise those interest rates for another year and a half. If everything goes okay for the next year and a half, if everything goes nice and smoothly for the next year and a half, what are the chances of that? They will start to increase the interest rates. Yeah, hold your breath on that one. I have 3 articles here from Sunday and Wednesday and every other day. We've got, well, there's the picture. Here he is. There's the guy. Those are his hands. That's Trump's hands. And you can, if you take a look, that little black mark on his cuff, on the cuff of his shirt, that's 45. He was the 45th president. Assessing Trump's grip on the GOP. His grip on the GOP is staggering, absolutely staggering. Day after day, you see these Republicans crawling out of the woodwork, supporting him and his fabricated theory that he lost the election, that the election was rigged, and all this crap. Meanwhile, he's built a war chest, I talked about this, of over $100 million. He's got a war chest of over $100 million. But the best one for the week was this editorial, and this was just in yesterday's, and this is, yes, Trump is ridiculous, and he is quite dangerous. And what they're talking about is the kind of stuff going on. The American political system is barreling toward another crisis. Of course, there's no guarantee that the crisis will happen, but the current complacency coming from much of the political establishment does not leave one confident we'll avoid it. The complacency coming from most of the establishment. Well, I watch the news and I read the paper pretty regularly, as you know. And Rachel Maddow seems to be the main person, and parts of MSNBC, trumping the democracy is in peril crisis. You don't hear it on that many other stations. You certainly don't hear it on Fox News. Not only don't you hear it there, it's not even an issue there. So those were the main little stories there. I'm going to grab one more big one that really bothered me. Let's put the picture of the book up. Now, here's the book, If Venice Dies, by Salvatore Settis. I'll put that in the corner for a second. Now, this was in, what paper was this? Tuesday, August 3rd. We had Looking for St. Mark's Square, but I'm going to get rid of it, and we'll get the other one up, the picture from the paper. And let's put it in the middle here. Okay, Looking for St. Mark's Square, but docked 2 hours away. You see that cruise ship in the corner of the picture there? It's about 10 stories tall. This cruise ship is literally about 10 stories tall. Now, the wife and I, we took our trip of a lifetime about 5-6 years ago. We went to Europe. About halfway through the trip, we wound up in Venice. And we came into Venice on a small boat. It wasn't a big boat. It was a small boat that brought us actually into Venice, into St. Mark's Square. You know, a small boat, 1 story high. While we were there was approaching one of these larger larger cruise ships. Well, these things are like 10 stories tall. They're bigger than the whole bloody St. Mark's Square. I looked at this and said, what are you kidding? This is not sustainable. This is absolutely not sustainable. Well, finally, they're not letting these boats dock there anymore. They're finally docked a couple hours away, and they're complaining. Some people are complaining that, oh, it's going to kill business, blah blah blah. Business was doing just fine. What was happening was getting overbuilt. Everything is getting over everything. This book, If Venice Dies, I found this book as I was leaving for Europe. And what it's talking about, the book is talking about how how people are moving from the countryside to the cities. And at one point, you had, 40 or 50% of the people living in the cities. Well, now you've got almost 70% of people living in the cities. And, well, here was the line that really grabbed me in the book. The crisis of the overgrown city is the other side of the crisis of the natural world. The crisis of the overgrown city is the other side of the crisis of the natural world. And the natural world would be part of, well, in today's paper, Friday, August 6th, below the fold, about a little bit in, page 5 or so. Have I got it there? Can you see it? Okay. System of currents is slowing. The currents in the ocean. They had a picture in yesterday's paper, and they showed the America and Europe and Africa over here, and they showed the currents, the Gulf Current and from the North Seas, and how these currents are changing. And what's going on is the gradual slowing down of the circulation is associated with a loss of stability. So as the temperatures are heating up, these currents that are basically determining the flows throughout these oceans and everything are losing their stability. We're approaching a tipping point which would cause an abrupt transition to a much slower state of affairs. Well, we've already got fish dying off all over the on the west coast, on the northwest. We've got fish dying off on the northeast. We've got penguin populations threatened. We've got whales floating up on some beaches in some areas. Every day in the paper there's something new with what's going on with climate change. And here they're talking about doing things to interfere with this, and the guy in the comment says, we're poking a beast, but we don't really know the reaction we're going to get. So they're a little bit nervous about doing anything, because if they do anything, there's all these unintended consequences. And this is one of the main problems going on here with this climate change, is we need to just reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere. We've already passed that 350 parts per million nonsense, which we talked about a while ago. Not nonsense, the 350 parts per million. And we're in bad shape. We're in bad shape, and everything's heating up and not looking good. The other article, the last headline, and then I'm just going to go to the corruption and poverty sour Tunisians on democracy. And the only reason this sort of grabbed me was the corruption and poverty sours people on democracy. There's a lot of corruption in all of your democracies on the planet. There's also corruption within your autocracies on the planet. So there's corruption and there's poverty, whether it's a democracy or not. But in some cases, maybe in Tunisia, before they had the democracy, before the Democratic Spring, these revolutions back about 12 years ago now. Before those Democratic Spring period, the autocrats sort of kept the country at least stable. And then last year you had this, or maybe the year before, you had this huge explosion that took place. It really shook everybody up. And right now, the poverty is, the whole economy is collapsing. People don't have money to put food on the table, and the the economy is, like I said, it's collapsing. The economy is collapsing. Let me just leave it right there right now. I wanted to talk about the two editorials at the end of the paper today. Krugman in praise of smoke and mirrors, and David Brooks. And these are the two, David Brooks. David Brooks, he's basically complimenting Joe Biden. He's saying that Biden's approach is working and the progressive approach is not working. That people are willing to get behind Biden, and that his whole idea about nonpartisanship is actually working. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party is skeptical, he says. And they're skeptical on how the Republican Party is going authoritarian, and the progressives are real skeptical about what's going on. But in the middle is Joe Biden. Joe Biden would not have. Joe Biden is, I think, the only Democrat that could have beaten Donald Trump. And it was close enough to be pretty obvious that he is the one that could have beaten him. The argument that Brooks is making is that there's been all sorts of bipartisan activity for the last few years. And he's going back to Obama and his budget compromises in 2013 and the health care billing that Trump passed in 2020. He's talking about the COVID bills that passed in 2021 and a few others. So we've got a list of these few nonpartisan compromises that were made. After Biden was elected, two-track pattern was still going strong. So he was saying that there was compromises going on, that two parties were compromising together, and after Biden got elected, he said it's still going strong. He used the term the circus. The circus realm gave us the horror of January 6th, and this is where I totally jumped off the tracks with David Brooks. The circus, he's referring to the television as the circus. So we watch television and we see the circus of the politics, but if we pay attention to what's going on in the background, there's all sorts of compromises and deals made and great stuff going on. Well, meanwhile, they can't get this voting bill through. They can't seem to move ahead on this infrastructure. They reduced the infrastructure bill. So I'm not sure how right he is, but the idea is that the circus realm gave us the horror of January 6th. Well, boom. There's the red herring. The circus didn't give us this. The exaggerations on television didn't give us this. This was all over everything. All the media covered this. Not only did the media cover it, the non-media covered it. It was a riot that took place, and they tried to take down the government. How could you possibly call it anything other than that? So that was the... like I've said before about David Brooks, he'll write, and 90% of what he writes I agree with. He always throws something in there to get you a little bit off center so that you will keep reading and yell and complain about him. Biden and the 91% of Democrats who view him favorably, the 91% of the Democrats who view Biden favorably, want to make the system work. American politics is in god-awful shape, but we're seeing a reasonably successful attempt to build it back better. Well, that was nice. David Brooks, long-term Republican, a rational Republican, has something nice to say about Joe Biden. Let's hear it for David Brooks. And Krugman, on the opposite side, on the left side, in praise of smoke and mirrors, he's talking about the $1 trillion that they need to borrow for the infrastructure package, and how at 1.2% interest, the debt would rise about 13% over a 10-year period. And the debt growth would be vastly outpaced by the growth of the economy. So the debt wouldn't snowball, it would melt. And he's sort of seeing this as a smoke and mirrors kind of a thing, whereas, okay, you say it's this much money, but this much money is a certain percentage of what the whole GDP is. Now, if you inject this much money, you're going to create more money. People that get money go out and spend it. Rich people don't. The corporations don't. But the average people like me, people like you, people like us, we go out, we spend money on food, clothing, and shelter, and a few luxuries here and there. So we spend the money. Polls consistently show strong support for raising taxes on corporations and the wealthy. Now, so far, Republicans have pulled back from giving the IRS some more authority and some money to go after these really wealthy tax cheats. So the GOP doesn't want to go after the wealthy tax cheats, but Krugman is sort of saying that people in general want to raise the taxes on the corporations, and they would like to get the wealthy tax cheats to pay what they owe. And he's thinking that with some more public support, we can get some of these things done. So that's in praise of smoke and mirrors. That was a little bit of a positive news from Paul Krugman and David Brooks for the day. Peace, patience, persistence. We'll see you as soon as we can. Thanks for joining.